First, just want to say thank you. I have had an enormous amount of success in my life thanks to everybody that is in DTA and Speed Up and this new game with the Axie Infinity and all the things I've done in real estate and businesses. So I just want to say thank you. For everybody that's been a part of DTA, all the students, everybody that's helped before, current, and after. Just want to say absolutely thank you because that's what Christmas is all about, right? Other than that, for the week, we mostly had a situation where Omicron, huge fears. There is some positive news in that it seems to be very infectious. The WHO, World Health Organization, reported that it doubles in the amount of cases every 1.5 to 3 days in community spread, but there hasn't really been any reported deaths, at least in the US. I think there was one they reported in Texas, which they retracted, but it seems to be a lot more infectious, not as lethal, which is a great thing, but we do have the fear of a lot of new lockdowns that are gonna start sputtering the economy and obviously affect the quote unquote economic recovery because we're just not completely recovered yet. So that's basically what happened overall this week. And we have countries in Europe that are actually going back into lockdown mode. And I'll share that with just a second. In the US, the Dow was up 1.65%, the S&P 500 went up 2.27, reached a record high, and the NASDAQ was up 3.18%. Overseas market news, global stocks have a capitalization of $1.8 trillion, and one of the things I found extremely interesting was the fact that world stocks are now worth $118 trillion, which is about 140% of the world GDP, global economy. So the value of the stocks are 118 trillion, which are 140% larger than what the global economy actually is. I thought that was a pretty interesting stat. European markets mostly higher for the week. Spain was up 3.03%. Istanbul can't catch a break. They cratered down over 10%. Latin American and Canadian markets were mixed. Canada was up 2.31%. And then in the Middle East, we have markets that are mostly mixed, with Egypt being positive 0.75%. Asia and Australian markets, the Philippines taking the crown. Hopefully some of you guys that are watching from the Philippines are okay after that super typhoon hit you guys, caused a lot of damage. My heart goes out to you guys. Philippines went up 1.61%. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency news. Bitcoin is higher this week, went up over 8% to just under 51,000. It was at 50,841 for 2021 so far, as long as nothing crazy happens. It's up over 75%, and the entire crypto market is worth $2.3 trillion. If you put that into perspective, the value of the stocks, I told you guys, was $118 trillion. Well, if you see the crypto market is only 2.37 trillion. So theoretically, it would have a lot of room to grow. Other than that, commodities, good news and bad news. There's already starting to be some energy problems and blackouts in Europe. We talked about that, I believe, about 2 or 3 months ago, right? Basically has to do with the situation with energy. They're going super renewable. In the winter, there's no sun, and then sometimes there's no wind. And there was a situation with the French that mostly have nuclear energy, and some of their production was actually taken down. If I'm not mistaken, I believe it was 10%. So due to that, winter is coming. The colder weather obviously increases the amount of energy that people use. There's a situation as well where Russia is going to start lowering, let's call it throttling, the natural gas through the pipelines that they feed to Europe. So thankfully the United States is able to send them some liquefied natural gas on some flotillas, which is literally just a bunch of boats. And thanks to that, the cost of the natural gas dropped by 43%. Now, due to the cold weather and the fact that there hasn't been, let's say, wind or solar, obviously there's not a lot of sun in the winter in North America either, but there's a situation where there's a big strain on the electricity grid, and unfortunately it affects the poorest people in countries first. Kosovo, being the poorest nation in the continent, they had to start introducing rolling blackouts for most of the 2 million citizens due to the overload on their electrical grid. And in addition to that, Serbia was forced to cut power to customers since they were not able to keep up with the situation with the outage from the French nuclear power outage, and that obviously caused them to start buying it from overseas and other places, which is tremendously expensive for them. And so they had to do blackouts as well. And it's unfortunate because this is probably going to continue to escalate, right? It's probably going to get to other countries as well, eventually arriving probably to France and Germany and some of the more developed nations. Other than that, U.S. crude went up 4%, 4.13% to $73.79. International Brent went up 3.56% to $76.14. Other than that, China in the commodity space, they have formed a rare earths metal giant by combining a lot of the companies or miners, let's say, that were in the space. If you guys don't know about rare earth metals, they're actually more rare than precious metals, and they're very important due to the fact that they're used in military applications and some, satellites and that kind of things, very sensitive electronics. And due to the fact that we have a lot of restrictions and environmental protections and things like that in the US, China is the only one, I wouldn't say only one, but they dominate the space. And one of the things that a lot of people actually had trouble with when we moved out of Afghanistan, for example, is that the United States military found rare earth metals in Afghanistan, a huge cache in mountains there. And now China controls that as well, because basically the Chinese just made an agreement with the Taliban government there. So worrisome for a lot of the world economy and Western nations, because now it's going to allow them to continue to develop these rare earth metals and mines a lot quicker now that they're consolidating the space and creating basically a mega corporation when it comes to these miners and producers. Precious metals are higher for the week as well. Gold went up 0.58% to $1,810, while silver went up 2.27% to $22.96. The move there with the precious metals is due to the fact that inflation looks to be a far longer term problem than what people were saying. You and I talked about this as well, right? The government is basically just admitting it. So now that they're admitting it, everybody's getting on the precious metals train. Financial and banking news, the IMF, the World Bank, and 10 countries led by Israel are simulating an alarming global financial system collapse led by Israel. This is a little bit concerning because a lot of times these governments simulate things that tend to happen. See if this one actually does. Russia also is revealing a new independent financial system, especially with their integration between Russia and China. If you guys don't know, there's a system called SWIFT, which is essentially any payment made from anyone to another person or a company or country to country in the world goes through the SWIFT system. Russia has always been terrified that they may be cut off from the SWIFT system, and then they're not going to be able to pay their suppliers and people are not going to be able to pay them. So now they're developing, or they have developed, I should say, a brand new independent financial system that can't be affected by a third country. That's what they said, as they move away from the United States international trade and start to use more of their own currencies. Remember, Russia, if I'm not mistaken, is the third largest producer, exporter of oil in the world. So that's, that can cause some damage. And U.S. producer prices exploded to a record high in November. If I remember the number, I forgot to write it down here, but I believe it was 9.6%. There's definitely a lot worse to come. And if you guys have been worried about the cost of things increasing in a lot of the stores, for example, when you go out to eat and things like that, remember that this is the producer prices. So by the time it gets to where we buy it, the consumer, that's a lot of extra costs that are being added on. And that's why inflation is most likely going to get a lot worse, not a lot better. If U.S. government statistics in regards to inflation would be calculated the same way that they calculated it in 1982, the actual inflation rate right now would not be 6.8%. It would actually be 15%, which would be the worst on record, literally the worst in history. Outside of the fact that the actual inflation number reported by the government, even if it was the number that they calculated in 1980, doesn't include essential things like food and energy. So oil has gone up, 50, 60% since for a year ago. Food has gone up 20, 30, 40%. I remember I gave you guys a list. Meat was up 40% and pork was up 20%, but that they don't report. So just keep in mind that a lot of the numbers that the government reports isn't actually the right number. So if you have an employer, for example, that's giving you a 3% raise or even a 10% raise, which is great at the end of the year, that's not even gonna, you're still losing. That's why they call inflation a hidden tax, because essentially every dollar that you have now is literally losing 20-30% in value every year, while you're only getting ahead 10%. So you're literally still down by the end of the year, right? And it's hard for employers as well, because essentially they're making less money too with the money that they make. So they can't raise their employee salaries by the real rate of inflation, because they're not making the same amount of money either. And that's why it hurts absolutely everybody. After the shock of inflation, the bond supply tremor may exist next for the global markets. There's a central bank that is the most reliable buyer, they say, for developed central banks, mainly the United States, the UK, Japan, and the Eurozone, has decided to stop buying so much debt, which essentially means that they're going to cut their purchases of about $2 trillion, followed by the cut that they already made of $1.7 trillion last year, which means that the governments are going to have to borrow a lot more money. So whenever you hear the US government or the UK government or Australian government or wherever you are, if they talk about the stimulus and they're going to inject more money into the economy, that is not a good thing, because long term we're going to have to pay for that. And that's why we're seeing so much inflation. Outside of that, China on Monday announced a cut in its one-year loan prime rate from 3.85 to 3.8 in an effort to prop up the growth and the slowing economy. So they're seeing a slowdown. And Monday, Canada's Bank of Montreal announced advanced talks to buy the U.S. division of the 7th largest bank in the world, which is BNP Paribas from France. They've decided to go ahead and exit the U.S. market, while Bank of Montreal is looking to get into the U.S. market. And the Federal Reserve estimated that Americans owe up to $1.75 trillion to the student loan mafia in Q3. And due to that, the average taxpayers say that they owe about $40,000 in student loan debt. And due to that and the situation with the rapidly spreading Super Michael Jordan Supreme Elite 3.0 Omicron variant, they decided the Biden administration to extend the federal student loan repayments. So we're going to have another extension where we don't have to pay until May 1st, 2022. In political news, U.S. Senator Joe Manchin has dashed the hopes of the Senate administration to release their new Build Back Better bill, which is estimated by the government to be to $1.75 trillion. Remember, if they're not being truthful about the inflation numbers, they're probably not being truthful about this either. And there are actually some people that are saying that this could cost upwards of $5 trillion. Remember that, if I'm not mistaken, we're at 29 trillion now in debt, 30 trillion. So literally, if it is supposedly what they say, which is 5 trillion, that would be adding another, what, over 10% debt? Not bueno. We're gonna have to pay that eventually. So other than that, that package won't be passing due to the fact that Joe Manchin, which is a Democrat left-leaning senator from West Virginia, decided to vote no on the bill. So that is going to stop a lot of the, well, if he doesn't agree to do other things. So now Biden administration is kind of stuck with its hands tied behind its back due to the fact that they can't get the votes for the bill that they wanted. And Chile's next president, Gabriel Boric, a 35 left-wing congressman and former student movement leader, has won the presidential election in Chile. He's going to be there during the historic period of a constitutional reform. This is the only first world country in all of Latin America, and now they're going to destroy themselves by changing the constitution, just like Argentina and just like Venezuela and just like Cuba did. They're doing that in the United States too, so we'll see how long we last. In economic news, mortgage lender Fannie Mae said that on Monday, the sales of homes across the United States expected to be up over 7% in 2021, 7.1 to be exact, while last year it was 7.3%. But they're forecasting a decline in the next 2 years due to this fact that there's limited supply, in addition to increasing mortgage rates and cooling residential real estate market. European energy crisis escalated into what could be an economic downturn. 11 European associations like steel, fertilizers, cement, and even paper mills are saying that the electricity for them has increased 4 to 5%. So go back to a second for the inflation, right? Inflation is only 6.8%, but electricity prices in Europe is 400, 500%. See how they're not telling the truth? So because they have skyrocketed in price, it may force them to stop operations because it has become uneconomical for them to continue production. So it's even worse problems for the supply chains and the things that we need. In corporate news, Boeing, the large aircraft maker, went up almost 6% on Tuesday after it was reported that UPS was going to order 19 767 jets. Also, RBC, the Royal Bank of Canada, said that they're one of the top stock picks for 2022, saying that it sees a lot of free cash flow improving. Nike shares went up by over 6% after they increased their earnings. They topped the expectations on both earnings and sales due to robust consumer demand in their biggest market, which is North America. They did scale back a little bit on their expectations what the future revenue growth was going to be, and now they're saying that they're only going to grow in single digits and not double digits. Shares of pharmaceutical giant Moderna went down over 6% after it was announced that the U.S. government gave emergency authorization to Pfizer for a new COVID pill that you could take in order to go ahead and help you with the pandemic. The actual pill is called Paxlovid. And in trade news, Taiwan's export orders grew faster than expected in November, over 13%. This is due to heavy demand for the technological items that we all love and adore. And in addition to that, the holiday shopping season. Remember that Taiwan is one of the countries that produces the most semiconductors, which basically is in everything now since we have mostly electronics in our lives. Other than that, China has placed tight restrictions on the border and the ports after the pandemic outbreak that they had in order to be able to try to control it. There's a lot of towns now that are suffering, and even countries. There's exporters like Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam that are in big trouble because there's now lines that are extremely long at the borders, and now a lot of merchandise could actually be ruined due to the fact that they can't get into the country or they can't get in fast enough. And in technology, Moderna is claiming that a third dose is going to increase antibody against the new Michael Jordan, Messi, Ronaldo 3.0 elite Omicron variant. They're saying that the results of an extra 50 microgram dose increases your antibodies 37 times, while a 100 microgram dose increases your antibody levels 83 times, even as they are working on a new shot for the new strain. And in investment news, global merger and acquisitions shattered records in 2021. The volume went up by 63% to $5.63 trillion by December 16th. That surpassed the pre-financial crisis record of $4.42 trillion in 2007. And ironically, the last time we had these kind of great numbers in mergers and acquisitions, we had a financial crisis. So we'll see if that's actually coming next. I believe so. Other than that, U.S. November new homes were down 14% from a year ago, while the median price of newly built homes went up 19% from one November to the next. And U.S. single-family rents in October went up 10.9% year over year, 3 times the 3.2% annual growth rate seen in October of 2020. But the inflation is only 6.8%, don't worry. Other than that, the Chinese struggling real estate developers are facing a growing number of repayments in the second quarter alone. They're going to have to, in the quarter one, they're going to have $18.5 billion. I'm going to start that over to make sure it's clear. They're going to owe $19.8 billion in quarter one and then $18.5 billion in quarter two. So a lot of people are fearing that a lot of these developers in China, like Evergrande, for example, aren't going to be able to pay those debts, which is going to, if they don't, most likely cause a huge crisis economically in the world. Russian authorities have pressured a lot of the tech firms this year. They're accusing them of not moderating their content properly by allowing users to post illegal content that interfere in the country's internal affairs. Google was fined $98 million, while Meta, which is the parent of Facebook, in addition to Twitter, have also been fined for the same exact thing. And U.S. recorded in international events, the U.S. recorded 1.7 million illegal southwest border crossings past year as of October, highest numbers since 1960, nearly 4 times the previous year. And in addition to that, that's only the people that were actually caught, not the people that weren't caught that already got through the border. And the WHO is warning the World Health Organization that, as I mentioned before, that the Omicron cases are doubling every 1.5 to 3 days in community spread, even though there's a situation where the UK now is seeing a dramatic surge in cases. Austria is imposing stricter travel rules as it just was ending the lockdowns. Germany as well as increasing its travel restrictions, while the Netherlands is literally going back into lockdown on Sunday, which is probably when you're gonna watch this video, all the way to January 14th. Meantime, in places like Florida, Texas, and Sweden, 0 restrictions, 0 mandates, 0 masks, and everything is fine. Makes you kind of question things, huh? Germany's Chief of Navy, Vice Admiral K. Achim Schanbach, is stating that the Chinese are increasing their navy every 4 years by the equivalent of the entire French Navy. He also said that alongside the Chinese naval buildup, they're pressuring or strongly suggesting that they follow the international rules for maritime matters due to the fact that they don't seem to care about the rules too much. And other than that, the U.S. will soon lift the restriction that was placed on the 8 southern African nations over the variant. In addition to that, the UK has already removed their restrictions. And an unusual facts this week, U.S. flights are canceled supposedly because they have a lot of COVID-19 variant positive tests. Thursday, there were 284 flights that were canceled. Friday, there were 688 flights canceled. And on Saturday morning, it went to 834. So hopefully you weren't caught in that. That's the news for this week, guys. I'm going to go. If you have any questions, don't forget to subscribe. And we'll see you next week. Have a good one.